What can you tell us about any of these people, basically? Dershowitz, Lawrence Tish, and Netanyahu. What's the most important things you think to know about them?
So Lawrence Tish, I guess we'll start with him. Yeah, he's one of these members of the so-called mega group that I've mentioned. He and his brothers created took over the Lowe's Corporation and basically built their empire, acquiring a lot of distressed assets across the board, a lot of them hotels, also movie theaters, things like that. They had a lot of very early dealings with Resorts International, which I mentioned earlier. They're a notorious CIA cutout created by the Dulles brothers that had infinite ties to organized crime and organized crime's offshore activity, specifically in the Caribbean. And their fronts were hotels, and the Lowe's Corporation and the Tishes operated hotels that Resorts International owned, the most notorious of which being Paradise Island, which was absolutely documented, connected to the Lansky Empire. And also Lawrence Tish had some weird dealings with his shares in Franklin National Bank and ended up sort of selling off those shares illegally to this Italian figure named Michelle Sindona, who was murdered in prison with cyanide-laced coffee after he was sort of outed as this point man for corruption between the notorious Italian P2 Lodge, the CIA, and the Vatican, and also the mob. And so, the fact that Tish is dealing with those people and then teams up with the Wexners and Bronfmans and some of these other organized crime families is significant. And I hope to write about the Tishes again because I think one of the members of the Tish family is very important in New York City specifically. She runs the NYPD right now, Jessica Tish, and she has been instrumental in expanding unconstitutional mass surveillance throughout New York City and should be heavily scrutinized for that. So, yeah. Interesting. And I guess the other one, it was Alan Dershowitz. So I'm not necessarily an expert on Dershowitz beyond his Epstein ties. I know that Epstein and Dershowitz are alleged to have met around 1996. Dershowitz says that was brokered by Lynn Forrester de Rothschild. Well, I guess Lynn Forrester, then she married Evelyn de Rothschild in 2000. They were set up by Henry Kissinger. What a lovely couple. But Lynn Forrester previously had a lot of weird ties with Epstein and introduced him to a lot of powerful people. She's also a big important funder of the Clintons historically as well, and also after her marriage. So in Dershowitz, I know he's controversial for arguing in, past newspaper articles that the age of consent should be lowered to when a girl gets her period around the time he was consorting with Jeffrey Epstein. And of course was Epstein's defense lawyer, has a lot of ties to the Israeli state. Helped orchestrate the sweetheart deal, was accused by Virginia Roberts, probably the most famous Epstein victim, of assaulting her, but has since retracted those claims after making them for years. Make of that what you will. And he's very cozy with Netanyahu. Like I mentioned a while ago, he and Brett Ratner were the special guests that Netanyahu invited to watch his UN speech. And he's been he's an ultra-Zionist, very big defender of Israel and its military adventurism and de facto apartheid policy with respect to the Palestinians.
I was actually on Piers Morgan. Have you ever been on Piers Morgan?
No. I don't think I'd be invited. It's fine.
Right. Well, I was on with him, and I said something about he said something about how I mentioned the women and children killed. And he said something like, that's really sexist and ageist of you because a lot of women, Palestinian women and children are terrorists. And then he also said, how old are the children? And a lot of people commented like, that's not the first time he's asked that question. But sure. I also brought up, I was like, it's really rich to hear Alan Dershowitz lecture about sexism, given his friendship with Epstein, the fact that he's defended Epstein. He's like, I've defended everyone. I've defended Bill Clinton. I'm like, oh, another credibly accused sexual offender. So that was really funny. And then I actually said to him, and they cut this out. I said, more women have credibly accused Alan Dershowitz of sexual assault than they have Hamas. And he was like, what did you say? He legitimately didn't hear me, but Piers Morgan was like, that's not fair. She took that back. She took those comments back. And then, of course, they cut it out. But then Dershowitz is like, oh, no, thank you for saying that. Now I'm going to sue you. I'll sue you.
Yeah, I mean, he's known for being a lawfare guy and threatening lots of that. I mean, the Virginia Giuffre situation. I mean, there was lawfare involved there. I don't know if that was necessarily the reason for her retraction of those claims, but it's certainly likely.
And we also know that I called him a bully on the show, and you just have to look at what he did with Norman Finkelstein. I mean, he went behind the scenes to bully people out of publishing his work, stuff like that. So we know he uses a full, it's lawfare, and it's also bullying and intimidation and threats. So.
Sure. Well, it's been very effective for him, and he had, early legal entanglements, hanging out with Donald Trump's mentor, Roy Cohn, for example, who is arguably the most notorious legal bully in the New York scene, with a lot of dubious associations. And also, I believe Dershowitz was invited to some of these B'nai B'rith events that Roy Cohn was intimately involved with. And B'nai B'rith is kind of a interesting group. They begetted the Anti-Defamation League.
Right.
But are basically kind of a self-described secret society that models itself after Freemasonry. Not exactly representative of all Jews, right?
Right.
But they claim to be, and often use that as sort of a shield to prevent them and their associates from criticism, sort of conflating themselves with all Jews everywhere. Which is very problematic and tends to actually increase incidents of anti-Semitism.
Right. And it's an anti-Semitic claim, too, because it's claiming that Jews are this monolith. And I guess last question for me is, I assume that you've gotten a lot of bad faith criticism from people claiming that you're an anti-Semite, right? Because you're critical.
Well, sure, of course. But I mean, it's along the same line of reasoning. For example, my work on Leslie Wexner and the Bronfmans has been called anti-Semitic. It's absolutely crazy that you would conflate all Jews with organized crime-linked billionaires who have engaged in a lot of very suspect activity. And in the case of Wexner, argue allegedly committed murder. I mean, it's really bonkers to make that conflation. And unfortunately, I guess you could say, in a sense, that these oligarchs use the Jewish community in their historical targeting as basically human shields for scrutiny into their crimes and business relationships, and less than legitimate things that they have engaged in over the years. And there's been efforts by Alan Dershowitz, for example, to accuse Epstein victims of being anti-Semitic, for example, and all sorts of other shenanigans. But ultimately, if you're going to protect families like the Bronfmans or Leslie Wexner from scrutiny, it's only going to lead to anti-Semitism. But arguably, that's what the Likud paradigm wants, because they're openly ethno-fascist. And they need that idea of Jews as a monolith, even though it's anti-Semitic, to further their goal of having ethnofascism be the dominant view of Jews, not just in Israel, but also internationally. And the best way to do that is to make them feel victimized, or sort of use a lot of this rhetoric Netanyahu uses of the strong must destroy the weak, and we have to make our enemies fearful of us, and we have to do all of these things to make people cower, whatever. I mean, it's very disturbing rhetoric. You also hear it echoed by Zionists in the private sector, like Alex Karp of Palantir, the CEO of Palantir, that's now aiding, Israel in Gaza. Has basically said the same thing, that our enemies need to be deathly afraid of us, and that's the only way to have peace. And this is stuff that's echoed by Likud all the time. But, again, I'm obviously a critic of Zionism, but people often forget that when Israel was created as a state, there were numerous forms of Zionism, like labor Zionism, for example. And now today, the dominant form of Zionism, because of Likud's dominance the past several decades, which has arguably been engineered, some of it by these American-based oligarchs who finance education and and rabbis in Israel and also Israeli government officials have tried to engineer that.
But you know what's so fascinating about what you just said is that I always think about how Israel live streaming its crimes, saying it's in the name of Jews, of course, creates anti-Semitism, and is of course just a disgusting. I mean, like the whole world is watching them do this. But they want anti-Semitism to justify Zionism. But what you brought up is like the personal equivalent of that. So you have these very bad actors, criminals, like corrupt people, and when they Dershowitz, for instance, like accuses an Epstein accuser of being anti-Semitic, that also makes people look at Jews in a negative way because it's like, oh, they're hiding behind their Jewishness and look at what the Jews do. Like he's drawing attention to the fact that certain people are Jewish and these are people who are like disgusting people. So it's an interesting parallel.
Well, it's just like acting like, this type of criminal behavior in which these oligarchs have engaged is exclusive to Jews.
Right.
When
exactly.
it's not.